Religion and science have gone their separate ways over the years. 500 years ago, there was no demarcation between what we would now call science and what we would call religion. There was just attempts to understand the world. And what happened is that science came about by developing techniques, methodologies for gaining reliable knowledge about the world. And the reliable knowledge that we got was incompatible with some of the presuppositions of religious belief. We as human beings are subject to all sorts of biases and cognitive shortcomings. We tend to be wishful thinkers and to see patterns where they're not there and so forth. And in response to this, science developed techniques for giving ourselves reality checks, for not letting us believe things that the evidence does not stand up to. One technique is simply skepticism, which you may have heard of. Scientists are taught that we should be our own theory's harshest critics. Scientists spend all their time trying to disprove their favorite ideas. This is a remarkable way of doing things that is a little bit counterintuitive, but helps us resist the lure of wishful thinking. The other technique is empiricism. We realize that we are not smart enough to get true knowledge about the world just by thinking about it. We have to go out there and look at the world. If you go to any university physics department, listen to the talks they give or the papers they write. Go to any biology department, go to any neuroscience department, any philosophy department, people whose professional job it is to explain the world, to come up with explanatory frameworks that match what we see. No one mentions God. There's never an appeal to a supernatural realm by people whose job it is to explain what happens in the world. Everyone knows that the naturalist explanations are the ones that work. Science does claim to know the answer to some things, but there are other things that it very quickly admits it doesn't know the answer to. Dinesh just gave you a laundry list of things. Where did the universe come from? Why is there any universe? Is there life after death? And he says, and science has no clue about any of these things, as if that's a bad thing. Scientists are extremely proud of the fact that we know some things, and we know there are other things we don't know. We know where the dividing line is between what we know and what we don't know because of good reasons. For why there's a universe rather than not, we don't know the answer to that. Is there life after death? We know the answer to that. Why? Because we know what we're made of. We know how it acts. We know there is nothing to keep any sort of soul alive after the body dies. You are made of atoms. You are made of cells, which are made of molecules, which are made of atoms. And as physicists, we know how atoms behave. The laws of physics governing the behavior of atoms are completely understood. You put an atom in a certain set of circumstances. If you tell me what those circumstances are, as a physicist, I will tell you what the atom will do. If you believe that the atoms that are inside your brain and your body act differently because they are in a living person than if they are in a rock or a crystal, then what you're saying is that the laws of physics are wrong, that they need to be altered because of the influence of a spirit or a soul or something like that. And that may be true. Science can't disprove that, but there is no evidence for it. And you get a much stronger explanatory framework by assuming that it's just atoms obeying the laws of physics. Science is clearly not the only way of knowing things. There are other ways of truth. For example, mathematical truths are outside of science. They are logical truths, not empirical ones. But it would be a mistake to think that religion is a different way of obtaining truth that is outside everything else. In fact, religious people have exactly the same epistemic standards as non-religious people do, except when they're talking about religion. Ian didn't actually give you a reason to believe that God exists. He just said that it's outside the realm of science to talk about it. But then when he really wanted to make a point, he said, I believe in miracles. For example, I've seen them. Data, experimental evidence is ultimately what matters. One of the arguments against science from the religious side of things is that science assumes from the start there's no supernatural realm or there's perfect regularity among the laws of nature, but that's simply not true. A scientist, if they were faced with something that was manifestly supernatural or a deviation from the regularities we observed in nature, we would try to understand that. We would not say, I just can't deal with that, I don't know what to do. We would approach it using the methods of science. Let's just imagine that people who believed in God took that hypothesis, that idea, if you don't want to call it a theory or hypothesis, that's okay, that idea, just as seriously as scientists took their theories. What they would do is try to be skeptical about it. Can we disprove this? Can we use it to make a prediction and compare that to the data? And a lot of people talk about the problem of evil. My favorite problem is the problem of instructions. I am personally a textbook author. I have read Amazon.com reviews of my textbook. But if I were God, my textbook would be perfect. If God existed, the one thing that if there were an omnipotent being that cared about us here on earth, I would expect clear instructions. I would expect a book that I knew exactly what it said, it was clear that it was right, and I would be able to follow it. If God did not exist, I would expect all sorts of different books. They would contradict each other. Some of them would be brilliant in parts. They would be silly in other parts. They would be uplifting in parts. They would be very depressing in other parts. They would be edited collections. They would be personal memoirs. They would all disagree with each other. Which of these two theories fits the data? Thank you.